only provides for equality in certain situations. Because the majority of people never moved from their member state of origin. If you look at the statistics, only 3% of European citizens live outside of their member state of nationality. It means that if we speak about equality rules and non-discrimination on the basis of nationality, only 3% of European citizens actually benefit from these provisions. Why? Because as long as you stay in your member state, non-discrimination doesn't apply. At least community non-discrimination. There are non-discrimination provisions at the level of the member states, but very often they don't cover the ground of nationality. So very often, simply by not moving outside of your member state, simply by not using your community rights, you end up being worse off than foreigners who come to your member state, and worse off than those who moved and then came back. The status plus the requirement to demonstrate that you actually fall within the scope of community law. So the status itself is not enough. And this is the biggest difference between the equality systems in the US and in the EU. In the EU, the status simply gives you an opportunity to use your right for the first time in order then to fall within the provisions of the non-discrimination rule. But in the US, it's the status and that's it. The status is enough. And the court is making small steps towards the recognition of the status. There is a very long line of case law where the court was trying to make sure that more and more situations are to create the interpretation of the law that would allow more and more situations to fall within the scope of community law, to allow those who find themselves in those situations to use Article 12 and not to be discriminated against. And the court first used the provisions on the free movement of services. Free movement of services is one of the four freedoms. It means that anyone can receive and provide services freely and move for that purpose from one member state to another. So basically, any provider or recipient of services is within the scope of community law. It means that in order to use Article 12 and not to be discriminated against, you need to demonstrate your connection with provision or reception of services. And this is what the court used and abused a little bit, if you want. That case concerned a British guy who was beaten up in Paris. He came to Paris as a tourist for several days, and he was beaten up and his possessions were taken from him. He went to the police, and the police asked him, "Are you French?" And he said, "No, why?" And the police told him, "If you were French, we would have compensated you everything you lost." And this is what made him thinking, so why are the French treated differently from me? I'm British. What's wrong with that? And it turned out that according to the French law, the French police was supposed to compensate if you were a victim of an assault in the street, and you were entitled to some money. But you needed to demonstrate that you are either French or permanent residents of France. So they were trying to play safe with regard to community law as well. But Mr. Cohen, that was his name, Ian Cohen, claimed that there is a violation of community law anyway, although he is not a permanent resident, and that his situation should be compared with the situation of an ordinary Frenchman who is resident in Paris and who is a victim of a similar assault. Why? In order to invoke Article 12, in order to claim non-discrimination on the basis of nationality, Cohen had to prove that he is within the scope of community law. He never worked outside of the UK, so he never used free movement provisions. He never studied outside of the UK. But what he said, I'm here in Paris as a tourist. It means I'm buying services from you. It means I'm a recipient of services. Recipient of services means that I'm covered by one of the four freedoms, free movement of services. free movement of services certainly falls within the scope of the treaty. That's why Article 12 can apply to me. And the court said, yes, obviously, Mr. Cohen is here to help the French economy to receive the services from the French, and hence he cannot be discriminated against. So like this, the court is basically playing around the limitations that we find in the treaty, the limitations on the non-discrimination on the basis of nationality principle. And so the court decided, okay, Mr. Cohen is covered by community law because he's buying something in France. Buying something in France means buying services. Buying services means he's within the scope of community law, which as a consequence brings in the possibility to invoke Article 12 and to be treated exactly the same way as the French are treated themselves. So France was, it was found that the French law was discriminatory in this case, and Mr. Cohen got the money which he would have gotten anyway if he were French or the permanent resident of France. This is the first approach which the court took. So the court used services. But Mr. Cohen is also a citizen of the European Union. And an obvious other way, although Cohen is a pre-citizenship case, but there are plenty of people who are in the same, who are in similar situation all around the community. So another obvious way for the European Court to proceed is to use Article 17. Article 17 says all the nationals of the member states, or the nationals of the member states are community citizens. So the court can interpret this statement in such a way as to bring those people within the scope of community law. And so far, the court has refused to do that, because it would mean an enormous expansion of the non-discrimination principle, because it would basically cover all internal situations. It will mean effectively that the member states will lose their possibility to discriminate against their own citizens. It will be logical from the point of view of citizens. But the member states are reluctant to do this because they think that then the community will become too powerful. So at this stage, the member states can treat their own citizens worse than other community citizens who moved to the member state in question. And so the court, in order not to use Article 17 alone, started saying that by virtue of being a European citizen and having moved into another member state, you can fall within the scope of community law. And obviously, having moved does not necessarily mean that you use the free movement right, because not all of the movements around the community consist in making use of Article 18 BC. You can move based on purely national law, you can move based on international law. It doesn't matter how you move. So basically, by virtue of being a citizen and finding yourself in another member state, even without exercising a community right, but simply moving under international law, for example, in France, the two truck drivers persecuted in the north of Italy. The north of Italy, as you know, is a trilingual region. So the locals who reside in the region of Trentino